This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Karen, and we're going to talk about your world as being a filmmaker, journalist, ghostwriter, educator. And I want to welcome you to the podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Phantom, for having me.
Well, it's fun to talk to people from around the world. We get to talk to a lot of interesting people. And one of the things we ask people of every show, we ask guests a couple of questions before we get to the heart of your story. What motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
Gosh, what motivates me is curiosity. Like, I can't stop being curious about the world. And so there's always like a little thread of something every single day that I'm like, oh, there's a thing that I want to explore. And then I just can't stop myself.
Well, that's cool. Because being a creative person, sometimes, I've never had a problem where I always get a lot of ideas. It's like the muse is always around, and I'm always like I'm in my studio right now around all my instruments because I have a bedroom studio. And the reason I built it is because I always have ideas, so I always want to have them put them down. I run into other people like they purposely put their studio away from them, so they only go there like when they have the mood to do it. But like I always have ideas, so I put them down all the time. So you never know. But,
You never know. And I feel like I work everywhere and like all the time. And so I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'm writing something down for myself or for a client. Yeah, always something.
Yeah, that's why you got your cell phone. You can do a voice memo. You got a little, you got a restaurant. You put it down on the back of the menu, the paper menu. You write down, the musicians were kind of famous for scribbling down everywhere in the back of everything you get, piece of paper you're throwing stuff on.
It's a cliche for a reason, man.
Yeah, but so we're gonna talk about this idea of like mastering. What we just said there is like how do you stick with a project till it's done? Do you find is that what you like to help people with procrastination, or would you call it something else?
Procrastination, people talk about writer's block a lot, and I help folks out with that. So I think that accountability is a big part of that. Nothing really happens in a vacuum, even though as writers, it's solitary, right? It's just me and the keyboard, just me and my laptop, just me and the pen and paper if I'm writing in a notebook. But talking to people is the way to move forward on projects. That is absolutely my experience. And so even just having me there and with some structured motivation, that helps people move forward. And like that's what I need in my own projects to move forward. I have to have like accountability. I have to have things. So like right now I have a screenplay that I'm writing for a producer, and I got to have deadlines for that thing, right? Like he said, well, you can just, write it when you can. I'm like, no, no. It won't ever happen, man.
Whatever dates, project plan.
You got to give me dates. So that is the way around procrastination and imposter syndrome and writer's block, all those things. Some kind of structured accountability. It's got to happen, or else it won't work. It just won't come together.
It might be hard because if somebody's like a pure creative and they don't have another gig, like I happen to be a software designer, and we've got project managers with dates and charters and SOWs. And I say, I'm living in a world for the last 30 years where I have to work by deadlines. And then I do this podcast, and I do record production. I do music. I got like 3 hats. And what I find is being busy keeps me motivated to actually do things. Like by having so many things going on, that I find a way to get them done.
See, that's the way I am, Phantom. I have like, people are like, how are you doing so many things? And I'm like, if I wasn't doing so many things, I wouldn't be doing anything. There's no like halfway in. I don't know. Yeah, I would just get so bored.
Yeah, if you give yourself too much time to think, it's like I live in New England. I live in New Hampshire. I like walking out in the pines, right? And I'm a mountain biker. So if I need to like get away from all this stuff, like in the house, in the studio, I just jump on my mountain bike and go on the trail. That right there, get the cobwebs out. If you go out and, get out into nature, tall pines and being by the river and going through the hills and stuff. It's like, it's something about, giving yourself something else to get away from, to kind of come back to it. Like you give yourself some space and then come back. if you need that, but I don't need too much space.
I'll tell you that this is something that I tell people all the time. One of my favorite writer quotes in history was Agatha Christie, and she said she did her best writing while she was washing the dishes. And I have like a dishwasher that I don't use. Like I hand wash my dishes,
Thank
and
God.
I have 3 boys. I have I'm a single mom, and
Yeah,
even
lots
my
to do.
kids, lots of dishes, and so like I stand there at the sink, and I like it's
Yes.
grounding, and it's not the same as like mountain biking, right? But like that's my version of mountain biking is like washing
Yeah,
the
well, if
dishes.
you give yourself other things, like if you get yourself like you're too, I don't know, if you're not tied down by like certain tasks, not that you're tied down, but if you have life and it's like routines that you can get into, um, versus like this being out there or Jack Kerouac on the road. I mean, I know some people like they want to be Jack Kerouac on the road and they want to be out there just traveling and they get the idea, but that's like, are you actually traveling? Or are you putting something down or are you traveling?
I actually have a client whose so I've written 28 books in the last 15 years. And I have a client whose book is very reminiscent of Jack Kerouac. And I'll tell you, that book would not have gotten written if he had been left to his own devices. Like it would have never happened. He had to have me there to like
Pull it out.
handhold him. Yeah. And it's a whole different thing. And honestly, like I've worked with musicians before, and it's another mindset, Benson.
Yeah.
Like it's
Well, yeah, we
another
can get,
thing.
well, the problem is the musicians, like you can get the musician that's either like, you get like a Dylan or a Hendrix and they're always on, or like a Prince, like they're always writing. And then you get the guy who's like, I write and then 2 years off.
That
And when
is
in that
it.
2 years off trying to get them to do something, it's gonna be hard.
It is going to be hard, and it's so ethereal. It's like there are all these ideas out there, and you can't ever quite manifest them. I worked with a client recently who professional ballet dancer, right? And he had a really fantastic story. He actually danced in Boston, and
Oh,
his name is
awesome.
John Lamb. Yeah, John Lamb. I went to see his retirement party. Worked with him on his book for a year and a half, and we completed it this past year. And that dance thing is so ethereal, right? It's similar to the musician of just how do you put this into words? Although with ballet, he was so focused, like the opposite of musicians I've worked with, because he's like, let's do it, discipline, hit the milestones, get it
Kind of like
done.
the athlete, like athletes, like I think if you have that physical, like a dancer, I think they got to keep a certain rep up to be able to do it. Like they got to practice. You know, like any athlete, you have to be in the skill. If you or you lose it, you don't use it, you lose it. And we find out sometimes with musicians that they take the 2 years off and they think they're where they were 2 years ago, and then they lost like all their ability. They got to ramp up 6 months to get back into it.
Which is really the same way with writing. So my partner's also, he was a professional ballet dancer, and those folks have a different kind of discipline than the rest of people, professional dancers, professional athletes. But it is also like that muscle flexing. So people tend to think that they can jump in and write a book or write a screenplay without either having written in many years or without having written ever. And it's like that's not how it happens. It's just not, it doesn't
You got
work
to do
that
the
way.
work, right? It's not 0 to 100. Like in order to be able to turn a phrase, to build characters, to build scenes that are actually readable, will pull you in. It's like it's a talent. Like, and you've got to be working at it. Either, I mean, if you're a natural and it just comes out like a Dylan, like Dylan could just go on a typewriter. People say, "Well, just coming out," right? And it's like if that's cool, if it's like that, but some people it's not like that.
Well, it's either got to be that or it's got to be survival. So when I started writing books was at a time that I had 4 kids at home. They were all a little tiny, and I was teaching public school, and I was the primary breadwinner in the house, and really the only breadwinner in the house, even though there were 2 of us. And I started writing as a means of survival. So I started
Mhm.
writing online to like help pay the bills. And the first book that I wrote was called How to Flirt. It was like a dating manual. And it was weird because I was like this mom with all these little kids around. I was like, I don't know how to flirt. I haven't had to do that in a long time. I've been raising babies. And wrote that book as a way to make money. And so really it's definitely like artistry and all those things, but for me, writing has very much been pragmatic, and I still get driven by my clients who I'm fortunate to have really fantastic clients and always interested in new clients and finding people with interesting stories. But you're still driven by the dollar bills. Like, it's hard to not be like, hey,
Well, yeah.
my kid's going to college now. I'm gonna have to pay those college bills. Let's get another book. Let's write some
Well, yeah, you're
words. Let's write
you
another
know, you
script.
think, if you think about studio musicians, they're always, they're there to get the work done. Like they would sit there, being part of like the Funk Brothers or Motown Machine, like they're there to actually get paid as a profession. It's not a hobby. It's like
That's right.
it's like a comic book writers. Like you go back like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, like they're working for the Marvel Machine or the DC House, and they were always getting, how many pages can we get? Can we get like we need 3 books a month, 4 books a month, 5 books a month? We got to get paid. We got to pay for the house.
You got to pay for the house, man. Like, that car note's not going anywhere. Like, I don't want them to come take my car. So let's like write the book, write the blog, write the screenplay. Like,
Yeah. You want that steady income. You don't want it's like, oh, it's just a jackpot. No, you want to figure out a way to be a professional writer, professional creator, where you're like, this is, if that's your dream, is like you got to put the work in, right?
you do. And so I teach. I'm a professor now. I teach at High Point University and been there for 3 years and really like love it. And I will say, having freelanced for most of my career, that 401k and that health insurance is real nice. Like, it's real
Yeah,
nice.
being a salaried employee is, there's something about that.
There is, but I will tell you, university professors, I could make more going back to teaching public school like I used to. Like, we just don't make a ton of money, and
Wow.
so it's like half of my job, right? Like, I still make more money writing books by far than I do by being a university professor. And then somehow my 3 boys keep eating. And it's like, no matter how much more money I make, they just eat more
Eat it up.
food.
They want more food, better food,
There's more pizza in the house.
more costly food.
Teenage boys, I mean, they just eat me out of house and home, but that's all right. It's a good
Yeah.
blessing to have. Good problem.
But the role as a ghostwriter, because I always get interested in that. 'Cause like even in music, we have ghostwriters. Like we have people who, they're working in their craft and really all like 90% or 50% of what's there, but they don't get the credit.
It's true.
So how did you get into that?
So it's that whole survival thing. I was teaching public school. I was a special ed teacher, and I started writing blogs on the side. I started writing lesson plans on the side, and then somebody asked if I could write a blog, and I was like, "Can you pay me in cash dollar bills?" Yes, you can pay me money. So that turned into blogging, and this was kind of at the height of the blog. Like, the blogosphere is less now, right? It's like not what it was
everything
10,
else,
15 years ago.
social media kind of took over some of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a different thing. But at the time, it was really like the height of the blog stuff. So I made good money writing blogs online, and that was ghostwriting. So I'd write for just like these bizarre places. Like, I ran a blog for a Beverly Hills plastic surgery place and like a tattoo place and like old folks' homes, just like all kinds of stuff. And I was good at it, and I got good reviews online. And then I got approached by somebody to write an ebook. And then and that ebook was How to Flirt, which was like 40,000 words. It was a lot, like a big chunk at one time. And then that turned into me getting hired by a vanity press. So if you're not familiar with a vanity press, it's a pay to play. You pay somebody to write your book, and then you pay somebody to market it.
Mm-hmm.
Versus people tend to think that like you're going to get a big book deal and they're going to pay you. That is no. Like, you have to be really, even the like more famous people that I've worked with have generally paid me, and then they shop their book. So that's kind of how I got into it. I started working for a vanity press, and then ended up writing this book with them called Killing the KKK. It was we retitled it Mississippi Still Burning. And so it was about this Black preacher who took over the KKK from a prison cell in Mississippi. And just a remarkable story. James Hart Stern, fantastic guy. So I wrote his book again through that vanity press, And then there was some hullabaloo, and he broke with them, and I went with him. And so that was the first book that really had my name on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then once that happened, more books came along. So when he ended up publishing it himself through Racial Reconciliation, which was his organization. So James passed away in 2019. I'm talking about him in past tense. He was a fantastic person. He passed away from bladder cancer, and mentor. I'll get misty-eyed, Phantom, if I start talking about him because I miss him. But so I wrote his book, and that kind of launched me. And then people find me online as I've done press and whatnot. People will like reach out to me. So
that's cool. So you get a Rolodex, and you get recommendations, and people like, they know your work, and then you get to work.
You do. And I ended up, the way I got back into teaching is the Honors College at UNC Greensboro, where I live in North Carolina, approached me after they heard me on NPR and asked me to develop a course on ghostwriting. So that's how I got back into teaching after having been a special ed teacher years ago. And then I ended up at High Point after that. So I still teach ghostwriting, and I have a book on ghostwriting coming out later this year. It's going to be through Innovative Ink, which is an imprint of Kendall Hunt. And so it's it's a big textbook that'll teach you how to do this job. And I developed ghostwriting like on my own. I used to be an actress many years ago. And so it's this conflux of method acting and creative writing and relational interviewing from anthropology, because I have some background in anthropology. So
so it's like social sciences. Well, it's like the idea of like empathy. Like I think like if you're working like in the creative arts, like if you get into a record company, you've got ghostwriters of a sort, producers, engineers, other songwriters. They come in, they maybe listen to a guy's demo, and then they kind of rewrite it, to make it work. Not that you take like the original concept that somebody had, and you try to stay true to their voice. So you have to kind of get in their head and understand it. Or I've run into people that do the opposite. They take it and they just totally turn it into like their thing, and then their thing might work better. But like I try to stay true to at least what their original intent was and make it better than what it was. Make it work.
So you've done that kind of work then, fairly
Well,
like
from
a
a
lot.
music, from a music perspective, but
yeah, I think it's really powerful. So when I have my students do ghostwriting exercises, because even my freshman writing students, their final exam in my classes is always a ghostwritten exam. And I find that it creates so much empathy in them. Last semester, I taught the ghostwriting class to upper levels as like a junior level class. And we worked with the Ronald McDonald House here in Winston-Salem. My students ghost wrote for volunteers of the Ronald McDonald House. And it was a really powerful experience for the students to like talk to these people and learn their journeys to this volunteer organization. And it's such a like powerful thing to get in someone else's shoes and to like write as they would. And then I also find it's really powerful with students and definitely with clients. I've finished a book over Christmas, sent it to a client, and she sent me like back today about how it just made her feel like to see her narrative in a book completed. It makes people feel something. And that's a really powerful thing to experience yourself, is to, well, I don't know. I've never had a good
to actually get somebody's voice that maybe they're not good at like turn of a phrase. They can't get it right. But if you interview them, when you talk to them, if you actually sit down with your the kind of the person that you're working with, you get the it's like a method actor when they're like looking at a character. Like they're them, like Al Pacino, you get into a character and then he's like, it becomes that, right? And then sometimes they have a hard time getting out of it, but it's like, you kind of put yourself in that mindset where you have to let go and then let in, it's kind of two-way street, the stuff that you have inside you and the stuff that coming from outside of you, and you synthesize. I think any artist, that's what you do. Like a blues artist is a pentatonic scale. It's the blues. Everybody finds a way to do the crossroads, right? But they do it a different way.
No, and that's true. And it's interesting you say that, like affecting you. One of the things that has been a struggle, I will say, that I've learned to do over the years is to separate myself. So there have been times when I got so deep into books for clients that it affected my own mental health, that it affected like my
We had to
like
get out of it. Like,
dark stuff. Yeah, a
yeah,
lot, because a lot of people who want memoirs written, now I've written all kinds of books. I've written finance books and real estate books and all kinds of stuff. But a lot of times people, it's driven by tragedy. Like the reason they want to write a book is they experience some
heavy.
tragedy.
It's heavy.
And so it's just like, oh my Lord, I can't live in this darkness. I had this one client, and I have to be careful because I have NDAs, but they had a very dark experience with a gun. And there was a moment when I was working on it. I was actually like Zooming with them like this. And they were telling me about this experience with this gun. And they're at home and they're like somewhere else in the world. And they're like, well, actually, you know what? I still have the gun. Let me go like pick it up. I was like, and like they walked over and then pulled it out of like this place that they had it, pulled out this gun, and we're like, yeah, this is the gun that like I almost killed myself with. I was like, that's
heavy.
a lot. That's a lot, sir. I'm not your therapist. Like
That's heavy to process.
that's a heavy. And then they went on and I don't know, that was like 8 years ago. That was a while back. And so learning how to really curate my interaction, that's something I work really hard with students. Like this is my job and I'm an adult. When I'm working with college students, it's like if somebody says something crazy to you, you can just like piece out of the interview. Like y'all don't have to like, and I had one student who ended up interviewing somebody that they knew, and this person unloaded on them how this person had committed sexual assault. And it tanked this poor girl. Like we had to get her into counseling on campus. She was not expecting this person to like
unload like a therapist. Yeah. Well, that's the
yeah.
problem. Well, sometimes like some of this topics can be pretty heavy, and like it may be either are there ways to kind of screen some of that out, or maybe people don't tell you until they get you like in the moment.
People tend to, I mean, you can't account for those things, right? Like it's tough. And so I think about like kind of screening my clients. I've had people approach me for books that I've turned down. I had a family once that I bailed on. Like, I mean, not bailed on, like that sounds, so in my contracts, whenever I do a contract, and I've been doing this for like 10 years, there are always milestones so that if at any point we get to it and we're like, actually this working relationship isn't working, then I have delivered the same amount of stuff that you have paid for so that I don't feel like I'm getting shafted and you don't feel like you're getting shafted.
Oh, okay.
And
So you have a way to cut off certain cutoff points.
yeah. And so it's like, you'll pay a percentage down and then it's like every time I deliver something, then I get another payment. And that way we never get too far. Like you've given me, $30,000 and then,
yeah,
and then we were like
a record contract, they give you the money for the album. Yeah. And then you gotta produce it because they already gave you the advance.
Yeah, I don't like to work on that. So I had this one family, and again, I have non-disclosure. So and this is probably 8 years ago, 7 years ago, 6 years ago, something. They all run together. But I was working with this family, and they had lost a child to gun violence, and so I was really like passionate about their story. And then we get into it, and it turns out that they really want to turn it. It was a white family. They really wanted to turn the book on this racist turn at the end and really make it about like Black culture. And that, and I was like,
you weren't
first of all, Black culture, that's not, no, that, and so it was, so I had to like disentangle from the book. I was like, you have an outline. They had like 10,000 words of the book. It's like, I can't continue with this project. Like
well, yeah, I mean, you have, everybody has like they're the kind of like what I do and what I don't do, and it's your purview to kind of say like I don't go there, right? So I think that's fair. If everybody's got agendas, and I like people to be upfront, like when we're working on something, Like if you gotta follow through with what you're gonna do. You commit to a project. It's like you create an album or something. It's like well, you probably want to tour with it, don't you? Because if you don't tour, you're not going to get any money.
That is the thing, musicians
Just
that
put it
way,
out there,
right?
and then it's like it didn't. I'm just going to put it out there. It's like, well, you got to promote it. Like, if you don't promote it, it's not gonna just go out there without doing it.
Which is a whole other piece that people miss with their books. It's like we can write a book, and I can write you a great book, or we can collaborate, and like you can write and I can edit, whatever that process looks like for each individual. But nobody is going to see it if you don't do something with it. And because you pay me my fee, that does not guarantee that it's going to get seen. You got to market it. You're
And
going
you
to
got to show up.
self-publish.
Yeah, you
Like,
got to show up. You got to do the interviews. You got to go to writer forums. You got to get to the conventions. You got to you got to go to the bookstores. It's like every musician thing. You got to show up at the mom and pop pizzeria and play there, and then play the bigger shot, and then getting a local crowd, get a bigger buzz. You got to put the time in. You got to do the work. Like anything, like an athlete, you got to go show up for practice. You don't show up for practice, you ain't gonna get to play. When the
it's
play
just,
happens, you don't know what to do.
it takes a long time, and people don't like, and sometimes people are either too overwhelmed by a book. They're like, it's going to take 5 years to write this book. And I was like, no, it will take us like a year to write a book. Like
That's cool.
that's about it. And then we'll need another 6 months to edit. And then it's done. I mean, like 18 months, that is plenty of time. Like that's just plenty of
Yeah,
time.
unless you really don't have the book in you, right? Like if you think you have a book in you and you only got like 15% of it, then how are you gonna get to the rest?
Well, I'll tell you how you get to the rest sometimes, Phantom. Sometimes you just make it up. And I have had plenty of clients who gave me very little, and they were for memoirs. And we're talking for like personal stuff. And they were like, can't you just make it up? I was like, yes, I can. I mean, like, that's like within reason. So I've had lots of clients who I don't want to say fictionalize, because really once they read it, then they'll be like, oh, well, actually the couch was blue. It wasn't green. And like, actually that was 1979 and not
So you
1985.
go through and it's like you kind of tighten it up. But I think it's like anything. It's like I think there's a lot of when people go and they tell their story, they kind of maybe add some embellish it. What they call it, embellishment. Because it's like if you were there, it's like, well, I remember this happened, but what they said there in the book is like, well, I don't remember that. But that's what like people's memories. Like you ask witnesses, what do they see? You see it on like a murder mystery. Everybody sees something different.
I mean, shoot, you
Like
ask
so
a
it's
spouse, man. Like you go ask somebody, go ask your partner, like what was your second date? And y'all might have very different ideas.
it was the pizza shop. It was the movie. It was the Chinese restaurant. I was like, oh no, I don't
Oh, and so
remember.
like you're making it up. We're all kind of making it up as we go along anyway. So if everybody agrees on the truth, I feel like it's the truth. As long as we're not slandering anybody, right? If
Yeah,
you're talking about what you felt or what you experienced, it's relative.
yeah. Does that become a problem when you're working with people if they start like if they're given something like a nonfiction account and then they actually have you run into issues where people actually put something in there that was controversial and caused like trouble, or you try to stay away from that?
So the one that I have like run into that with would be James's book, because the KKK was not happy about that book,
Yes, I wouldn't be.
shockingly, and so there was like a lot of that. Now I did not feel any of that because James, he took the brunt of that. But when that book came out, there were restraining orders. There was all kinds of stuff that went around, and now that I'm talking about it again, I don't think any of that gets kicked back up, but who knows? So yeah, there is that. I do intentionally fictionalize things with clients often to protect people, and I will say that.
Mhm.
So I had a client who I always have to make sure that I phrase things so I don't violate my contracts, because I am very protective of people's privacy. But I had an experience that happened within someone's family, and they did not want it to be in the book. And I was like, because there was something violent that happened between family members. And I said, this, like, it needs to go in, and we can like fictionalize it. So we ended up fictionalizing it so that we didn't implicate the family member. But then it was a really important developmental piece. It's like the rest of your story doesn't quite make sense to the reader if we don't put this, like, they're not going to understand why this next thing happens.
Why, it doesn't make sense.
So we're trying to get to the emotional truth, right? And so then if we have to like change the events to protect people, that's fine.
Yeah. But it depends. Like, if you can get a really emotional truth, sincerity, if it, it's like, I don't know, the logic of it. It's not logic, but it's like, does it flow? It's like if I'm in a song and I've got too much discordance, then you're picking up, it's like, this is not harmonious. It's something that seems off. It's disjointed. So it's like, if you get some kind of flow that's disjointed, it's like, well, I don't get the connections. It's kind of scattered. Then you're like, I can't, you got to make it so somebody gets into it, and they can have a different experience. Like how people read or listen to music, everybody will have a different experience, but it has to like speak to the audience in a way that they can actually process.
It does. And this is something that I teach writing in the universities, and I'm a bit of an intellectual, and so I really always think of it in terms of rhetorical appeals to rhetorical analysis. So I teach my students ethos, pathos, and logos. We're appealing to authority through pathos. Like, so for instance, with the family member, by making it a family member, like by telling this attack that happened to you personally, there's a bit of an appeal to authority because people can understand the familial relationship, right? That's ethos. And then logically, logos, we have to appeal to logos. If it doesn't make sense, the reader's not going to be touched. You're not going to reach your audience. So logically, this piece had to exist within this novel, within this memoir, or else the rest of it wouldn't make any sense. The logical appeal is gone. And then of course, pathos and like emotional, you have to like make them feel the feels. And if we fulfill all of those things, then generally when we're building a book, it'll go just fine.
Yeah, it'll get people to want to get pulled in. And if you get into the book and you get drawn in, and you stay in the book. It's like the hook in music. Like we got 15 seconds, 30 seconds to get somebody to stay in the song. Like you might have a 40,000, 90,000, 200,000 word book. You got to get somebody to stay in it. As musicians, we got to really get them to stay. Because people don't have the attention span they used to. Like we could write 5 minute, 7 minute, 14-minute songs. We can only write a minute and a half, 1.5 minutes. Now people got to get drawn in the first 15 seconds or we lose them.
Well, it's like that old thing with committing to buying an album, right? It used to be like, if I bought, whoever's album, if I bought them, let me think of somebody who's not controversial. But whatever, like if I bought a J-Lo album, right? And like, I'm going to listen to that thing front to back because I bought the CD, like I gave my money. I'm going to like get my money out of every single track.
Yeah.
Or like I think about my mom. My mom always listened to the Temptations, right? She was obsessed with them when we were kids, and we would listen to the whole record, man. There was like not a lift in the needle.
Around. You don't skip around. Like if the vinyl, you don't skip it. The problem with these playlists, people skip around. It's kind of like liner, cliff notes. They go, are people going to read the book or are they going to read the cliff notes? You want them to actually read the book. You don't want them just reading the cliff.
But that's the thing. That is the thing with long form content with books. If you can get somebody in for 20 pages, then we have a lot of do not finish. There's a lot of DNFs out there, but you can, if they're invested in the book enough that they purchased it, they're going to usually finish it. So you just got to get them a little ways in. And we see that. So I'm in the filmmaking space too, right? My MFA is in screenwriting. And we really talk about those first 5 pages. And if you don't have them in the first 5 pages, they're gone. But then once they're in, like you can usually keep them in.
Yeah.
In that long form content. It's just music is so different though. I feel for y'all.
Yeah, it's harder. Like if I still try to hold on to the 5-minute song. And everybody tells you shouldn't do that. But I'm like, that's my songs don't kick in until like 2 minutes, so I'm kind of lost in a minute and a half. So,
Oh, that's rough.
but it's it's a different type of art form. You have to play live more, because then people will be
Mm.
into it. People want to hear stuff that goes longer than a minute and a half when you play
Well,
live.
right. So if you played live, right, that's the thing. Like if I committed to leaving the house and I'm sitting there, I'm listening to the whole damn song because like I'm here. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah.
gonna just click away.
Yeah, you gotta get people to get engaged. There's so because I wonder about like social media. Like you get the TikToks and the Instagrams and the Facebooks. Everybody's getting to these 15-minute, 30-second things, right? And there's a lot of clickbait that tells you something, then you get in there, it's not even what they told you. But it's like say you're getting the people to like take their time away from that to get into a book, which is a more of a commitment. And people have, again, I'm a child of the '70s, so I would sit and read Moby Dick or The Hobbit. Or probably, I would sit there and do it because I only had 4 channels, and, maybe a couple channels I could get on a radio that came in okay. No cable TV yet. So, like, there was more, like, reading, more playing with Legos and, playing video games or some erector sets or something. It's, like, actually engaging in, like, a creative process that took more than 15 minutes. You would sit there for hours, you know?
You would, and I will say one of the things I hear from my students most often is that they want more of that. So I teach writing for the medical humanities, and one of the things that I do in that class is we read big books. So we read Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. We read Anna Fadiman's The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. And these are like long books, especially Fadiman. Like it's a heavy book. And
Mhm.
students really dig that I assign them full texts.
Like,
They have to
full
read a whole book
real
and
book.
they
Yeah.
like it, like they miss it, even in the college level. Like that's a whole nother thing with like high schoolers not reading long books. There's a big thing about it last fall. But yeah, I think that people want that. That's why their movies are so freaking long. I mean, like I was there for Wicked, but it was
Yeah.
long.
Yeah, they're getting longer. Like, movies are going, like, they used to be, like, less than 2 hours, now they're going to 3 hours, 3.5 hours. They get these well, I was reading The Hobbit, Tolkien, Dungeons& and Dragons kid, we were trying to act out Tolkien, you know?
Well, it's like, I mean, Tom Bombadil never made it into the movies. I mean, because there was just like this whole aside where they're just like gone. It's like,
Yeah, there's all this stuff. There's all the depth of things that's in the old, just growing up. It's getting into things like I say, like a band like Yes, they had a whole album side. Genesis. It's like one song would last 20 minutes, 18 minutes. That's like progressive rock or fusion jazz. It's like that's what it is. It's long form stuff, and I do see kids getting into they say that on the scan the record listens. There's a lot of kids listening to '70s, '80s, '90s music where it still was kind of long
yeah.
versus like the newer stuff because they miss that creative spark of the things that were like. It's not just like just a jingle. The problem is like everybody wants these groove. They're just like it's just a groove. There's no there's no song structure. You think about writing, it's like there's got to be a certain elements to a good story, certain elements to any kind of creative work. And if all you have is the flash, then you can't build up with the crescendo or decrescendo, to build it up. And when you're writing a story, you've got certain elements. Everybody just what they cut to the action scene. Cut,
But
you know,
so I talked to this about with my students, and we analyze TikToks and extreme short form videos, and I have my students make short form videos, and we put it on Freytag's pyramid, which is like the introduction, rising action, climax. Like you remember that from school, right? And
mhm,
I still would argue that that structure is still there in Western media, even in these like little 30-second TikToks, or else it's not satisfying. Like there's lots of content that's out there that plays around with it, but it's not satisfying on purpose. So that's why they can like hook you into the loop because they cut you off right after the climax of the video and then they loop it back around again. And then they get
mhm,
that second view from TikTok, which who knows if TikTok will even exist in a week, but that's
yeah,
a whole nother
yeah.
thing.
Just trying to get people to, I guess, be more adventurous. as audience. Because I would think like it just seemed to me, being a child of the '70s, I think people were more willing to give things a shot.
Mm.
That they like if it doesn't crack your attention because it's got so many distractions. Your smartphone is the distraction. It's it's like kicking off all these alerts. You can't stay in anything because you're getting pulled around to all these alerts, and then you're getting like overwhelmed with a lot of nonsense.
One is that it prevents you from being able to like follow through. And I really utilize in my writing, and I teach this to my students and I work on this with my clients, the Pomodoro focus technique. And it's a really super effective way for me. And then I've seen it be really effective for other people of forcing yourself. It's like deadlines, right? Like we were talking about. You have to have a deliverable. So if I say in Pomodoro that I'm going to focus for 25 minutes on and then give myself 5 minutes off, that feels manageable. Or 50 minutes on and 10 minutes off. And teaching yourself, it's like a muscle. People are like, well, I can't write. Well, you got to train that muscle. Like you have to train that focus. And it's going to take some time to teach yourself to drop in. And then there's all kinds of other like things that hold you back. A lot of it is radical self-acceptance. Writing and creativity of really any kind is really just accepting that my work is valuable and I'm going to trust myself. And that's really freaking hard to do, especially kind of as our culture flattens and AI is flattening our writing, which AI is BS. It's horrible.
Yeah. Well, what I hate about it, it's such a crutch. And, the problem with it, and I'm in IT and, we can get blamed for creating stuff like that. Because the problem is we create these tools and just because it can do it doesn't mean you should use it. So the problem is like that happened with sampling. Just because you can sample something doesn't mean you should sample a Queen David Bowie song and put crappy lyrics on it. You should actually use it as a tool, right, to enhance things, but not to take what people do. They go for the shortcut. Like I'm gonna make it do the whole thing, and then they say, "Oh, just because it's better than the Google search prompt." Because it gives you back something that looks like, well, I could get away with that. You do a prompt engineering and you get back like a doc. It's like, oh, that's more than what it would have done before. And then you're lazy and you don't refine it, or you don't use it to just find some information and then verify it and check it and cite it like you're supposed to. Like a research paper is like, oh, I'll just use it.
I'll tell you this, and this is like, I think it's really sad watching my writing students over the past few years. And I see these young kids coming in and they feel like AI can do it better than them. So why should they try? Like their voice it's not worth it. That's the tide I feel like I'm fighting with these kids. Because they feel like they're so replaceable and they already feel like that. And I mean, it's hard to be a teenager and a young adult anyway. You feel like, where do you matter in the world? And when you have the world telling you that AI can do it better than you can do it, that's so hard.
All the tech bros telling you that like you don't, they knows all human knowledge. Like really?
No, it does not.
How could it know all it? It's like, really? Like, where do you go to school? It's like, what?
I have my students reading Oliver Sacks right now. And if you've ever read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, it's phenomenal. And it's these case studies of these individuals with these wide variety of neurological differences. And it's like, that is not in a computer anywhere until somebody writes it down. Right.
Well, neurodivergence is like a lot of creative people are neurodivergent, right? It's like on the bell curve. It's outside of the bell curve where the creativity is on the outer edges, right? The bell curve, like the people in the middle, is like the people showing up, phoning it in a cubicle. But it's like the people who are actually at the Einstein, you take a test on math, get D's, greatest physicist ever. Your measuring tool didn't know how to measure him. And then you use a tool to measure people. It's supposed to measure the teacher, right? And you're measuring the kids, and then you're actually failing as a teacher, and these kids are not passing because the teacher's not interesting. Right? It doesn't draw them in. My greatest professors were the ones that made me want to come back or go over their house and have coffee and talk to them after class and keep on talking because they drew me into it, made me want to do it. versus somebody just saying, well, check it off. It's the next thing on your to-do list.
Which is the same thing, right? So, and that's very much where I am with my students. I have some students I mentored years ago that I just still come back and I still talk to and follow them in their careers. But we are missing that piece of valuing the individual. Like we are just so missing valuing the individual in our society and engaging, like valuing these young kids. And I say young kids, they're like 23 or whatever.
Yeah.
But valuing these young people that they actually have something to say and they're more than just an algorithm.
Yeah, we're just using them as the tech bros. I would kind of just say it's kind of generic, but they just think they can monetize the whole creative space so that they get all the money. So my argument to creative people is like they want to take away your creative spirit and charge for it through their token systems and then tell you that you're not needed. You need to give yourself permission that you are a human. You have better than the computer. You're always going to be better than the computer. And these guys just want to make money. So don't give your money to them, right? Go be you. Be a rebel and be you.
Absolutely. And be a rebel and be you. And what I really see in students is like, you can do hard things, right? So I guide students through novellas and scripts and things. And it's like, you can write a big piece. It's going to take you a long time. It's going to take you a lot more than you think it will, but you're going to feel so good on the other side when you finished a book. Like I have lots of students who have finished books because of my mentorship. And then people I've coached and through screenplays and everything. It's like, you can do this big thing. Like a screenplay seems so big, but first of all, it is so much easier than a book in some ways.
Oh yeah. I think it's like a teleplay screenplay is, to me is like, I don't know, like poetry, but it's a different form. It's like songwriting. Songwriting is not like writing a book. It's a shorter version of it, right? You have to be more succinct and get, might have 5 minutes, might have 14 minutes, might only have 2 minutes, but you still have to tell a story. And so like the idea is like you can take things on. So maybe you can't write story. Maybe you could be a songwriter. Maybe you could be a poet. Maybe you could be somebody that goes to, the spoken word. You find your niche as like whatever you want to do in terms of like written word. There's a lot of cool things you can do. Give yourself the permission to do it.
And then start to see your life in different ways. So I teach like this semester, I don't know what's up. I have a ton of student athletes. I probably have like 20 out of 60 students. Like a third of my students are student athletes. And I think about how every game is a story, right? And you're going back and like casting, it seems like it was inevitable. And, after it's happened, after the Chiefs win the Super Bowl, it's like, well, of course they were going to win the Super Bowl. Right. And then you tell the story through that. But sports is storytelling. I'm like, fashion is storytelling. Like all of these things, you think you don't need writing, you don't need storytelling.
Every day you're telling a story. Every day whether you think you're a writer or not, every day you're actually very creative. In your life, every day you have to get through that day. If you're talking to outside of your house, they're talking to people, you're telling stories. And if you start to recognize what you're doing, right, and be a little more aware, like, and then actually start like having some lessons learned about what you did during the day, keeping a diary, keeping a log, keeping a voice memo, actually starting the process, then that's how you start diving into creativity. Is that we start, as a writers, we look at things, we observe, right, and then we're able to take things and replicate or extend it or turn it into something else because we just are can channel that. But I think everybody can channel that at levels. It's like writers and creative people do it at a higher level that's like recognizable by other people.
They do, and it's very much that way, Phantom. And people ask me where I learned to tell stories, and I always tell them it was my mama. So I grew up and we didn't have much at all, and she used to have these big yard sales to help. She was a single mom trying to raise 3 kids, like me, single mom trying to raise 3 kids. And she would have these yard sales and people would come in the yard and they would talk and they would tell her stories. And they came back to her year after year after year. And like our stories got intertwined, and like this family's kids would be wearing the hand-me-downs from my brothers, and like our toys would go throughout like the community. And my mom stood there telling stories and listening to the stories of all these people. And that was like where I learned how to tell stories, was listening to my mama in the backyard selling like hand-me-down shoes. So it's all there.
It's
And it
all,
made her
yeah.
life so successful and happy.
Well, you picked up on it. You remembered that. I remember my poppy, like, he passed away, but he was a insurance
Sorry.
agent. But he had to be out there telling stories. Like, every salesperson, from the Fuller Brush salesperson to the encyclopedia book, they are able to communicate and tell stories. They spend a lot of time before they ever get a sale actually communicating. And usually it's like storytelling or listening and then repeating things and learning how to actually, have a conversation and then weaving what somebody said into something that they need. It's the listening skills. It's like creative. I used to tell my dad, like, you got a lot of creative capability. You never put it down. But you tell stories your whole life. You could have wrote a book, but he was too tired from being a sales guy. He never had to book it.
Well, that's the thing, is people are too tired, which is why they end up hiring me. Is they are like, their bandwidth is bandwidth. They're doing other things in their life. And so it is a certain kind of person who can afford me. And that is its own thing, right? That's who stories get told. But it's still that impetus to like tell our stories. That's what it's all about, man.
Well, we've got your website, www.autumnkaren.com. That will be fully clickable. We were just live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And that will be fully clickable on those platforms within the podcast description. We're going to be on a bunch of other platforms by tomorrow. There's going to be a landing page I'll send to your listeners to be able to check that out, and viewers. So thank you again for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. It was really cool.
Thank you so much, Phantom. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. Have a good night. I just have to jump on another.
Come on, jump on your next thing. It's so good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.